What are these, nuclear bombs? This is what we see in game versus how they would have looked historically. We are not just a wrong unit, we are not even the right nation. Amazingly, the real events are actually crazier than what's depicted here. This is so wrong that it has to be a troll. Just no game.
June 4th, 1940. Nazi forces enter Paris.
What a way to start your game, with a misdating of one of World War II's biggest events. German forces entered and occupied Paris on the 14th of June, not the 4th. The developers may have mistaken the fall of Paris with the Operation Fall Rot conquest of France as a whole, but even this did not begin until June 5th. We see a large German banner hanging down the middle of the Arc de Triomphe. It is a fictional version with the swastika replaced with an iron cross. Why they chose to censor it here is anyone's guess, considering how we go on to see a massive amount of swastikas in most of this game's levels. Also, the occupying Germans at this point never hung such a big banner down the center of the Arc de Triomphe. Instead, they erected smaller flags on top of the monument. The Germans in Paris are seen all wearing M40 uniforms, which had only recently entered use by the time of the invasion of France. The earlier war M36 uniforms would still be more prevalent. Some of the game's cutscenes have weird discolorings. We can evidently see this on the uniforms, which appear as a strange shade of blue instead of the grey and green shades of Feldgrau. The white stripes of the German Empire tricolour decal on their helmets are also yellow, making it instead resemble that of the flag of Belgium. To the sides of the parading soldiers, where the audience would be, are Tiger I tanks, which did not enter service until 2 years later in 1942. Alongside Panzer IV Auf H or Js, which did not see use until 1943 and 1944 respectively, as well as Panther tanks, which were not first fielded until 1943. There was not one thunderstorm reported over Paris in the whole month of June 1940. Therefore, this cutscene depicting such harsh weather is erroneous and was likely just added for dramatic effect. A problem faced by all, whether you're playing old classics like Call of Duty 3 or especially for the newer unoptimized games such as Black Ops 6, is performance issues. But luckily HoneGG, the best PC optimization software, offers assistance by sponsoring this video. Hone is incredibly easy to use. All you have to do is use my link in the description to download it and alter the many available settings to increase your FPS, reduce input lag and much more. For example, let's see the effects by turning on gaming optimization, enabling Hone gaming mode, then clicking on any title of your choosing like Warzone 2 and activating the game's unique performance preset. Before, I could barely reach a FPS of 150, but with Hone I get well over 200 FPS. If the optimizations are not to your liking, they are easily disabled with just a press of a button. And if you don't know what settings to use, then you can just copy your favorite pros. Hone has over 800,000 users, a bunch of great reviews, and has a completely free version ready to try out. So if you're looking to maximize your PC and gaming experience, then check out HoneGG by using my link in the description. Now, back to the inaccuracies. Our first chapter brings us to the Battle of Saint-Lô in Normandy, France, which the game refers to as, quote, the bloodiest battle of the war. This is woefully incorrect. The Battle of Stalingrad was the bloodiest battle of World War II, and there were many others larger than the fighting for Saint-Lô. A better title for this chapter would be The Capital of the Ruins, which was a nickname given to this town following the massive amount of bombing it received. The title card states that it is 6 PM on July 19, 1944. However, Saint-Lô had been firmly secured by 7 PM on the previous day of July 18th. By this time on the 19th, the main assault was over and the Americans were just left clearing out snipers and other pockets of German resistance remaining in the town. Due to the developers wanting to give the player a bigger sight image, many of the iron sights on the weapons are noticeably larger than their real-life counterparts, as especially apparent on the M1 Garand. When reloading the M1 Garand, we still see at least 2 bullets in the gun even after emptying and ejecting the clip. In the game's bonus materials, it claims that the M1 Garand was, quote, the first semi-automatic rifle in military use. This is just not true. There were many other military-use semi-automatic weapons before the Garand, such as the French RSC M1917 that was used in sizable numbers in World War I. There were also even American ones like the Winchester Model 1905 and 1907, which, although in limited numbers, did see military use during the Great War. The majority of the images for the guns in the bonus materials are flipped, and so represent mostly non-existent left-handed versions of them. Due to the devs making one model for each and then just reusing them, all of the serial numbers on the weapons are exactly the same. A similar thing can be said for all the game's vehicles, which share exactly the same serial and unit numbers, as well as paint and camouflage.
You want to try cooking one off?
Technically, you can cook a grenade by holding onto it after ignition. However, to do so would be dangerous, would go against the design point of this safety feature, and would defy military training, which taught to throw a live grenade to a safe distance from you as absolutely soon as possible. This is not just a case of Huxley being a bad teacher either, because the game's bonus materials also includes this fact that you can cook them, and treats it as if it was actually a thing that soldiers would commonly do. The Mark II grenades clipped or rather floating on the soldiers, as well as the one in the bonus materials image, are incorrect. They are missing their coloured rings, with the fuse and body appearing to have been modelled on post-war surplus training grenades. The grenades still have their safety latches attached when thrown, so should not explode. The smoke grenades we pick out of the crates and use are modelled on the post-war AN M8HC. Period M8HCs had a different colour, yellow writing, and a yellow band on them. The grenades often duplicate when picking them up. For example, we are seen picking up 1 frag and 1 smoke grenade here, but then receive 4 frags and 6 smoke grenades in our inventory. Also, for whatever reason, when in this camp, the grenades keep unlimitedly refilling themselves, allowing us to turn the place into a smokehouse. Despite being an infantryman, Huxley is always seen wearing an A4 cap, which were mostly issued to Air Corps mechanics. It's July and thus pretty hot, so him wearing such a beanie is also quite illogical. He should just be wearing an M1 helmet, especially when in combat. Throughout the game, Huxley wears a pistol belt that is completely void of any ammo pouches or any other standard equipment. All other US soldiers are also exclusively seen wearing pistol belts, and only carry M1 ammo pouches for pistol and carbine mags, which very much do not correspond to the weapons they wield. Pretty much all of them should have a rifle cartridge belt instead. Their pouches lack buttons, and the first aid pouch is attached up on their belts instead of hanging off the bottom as they should. With the exception of the one worn by Sergeant McCullen, all of the soldiers' helmets are missing the insignia of the 29th Infantry Division. Many of the soldiers are carrying what appears to be Mark III concussion grenades that for some reason have the words flashbang written on them, despite the fact that flashbangs were not developed until the 1970s. The M16 coloured smoke grenades would be a more appropriate replacement for the squad leaders and such to have. All of these soldiers are wearing green HVT trousers, and with the exception of Huxley, all have on HVT jackets too, even though the 29th Division in Normandy wore almost exclusively wool trousers and M41 jackets. If it was too hot, they would take off the jackets and only wear their wool shirt. All of the Americans outside of our main group have private first class insignia, despite their name overlays saying that they are regular privates or corporals. The standard issue entrenching tools are completely absent from the GIs. The troops are also missing many gear items that they would still have from D-Day, including assault vests and M7 rubber gas mask bags, which were mostly used for extra storage at this stage. We see a large number of lower enlisted ranks like privates being armed with M1A1 Thompsons. It would only really be NCOs and the likes of vehicle crews and engineers that would use this SMG. The game itself even seems to somewhat recognize this fact, as in the bonus materials it states that the Thompson was, quote, generally issued to officers and NCOs. The picture used for the M1A1 Thompson in the game's bonus materials looks absolutely cursed when compared to how it's supposed to look. There is a complete absence of M1 carbines in this game, even though they were common among the just mentioned NCOs and vehicle crews, as well as COs, weapon crews, and radio men like Guzu. Although not as common, we should start to see some grease guns making a presence too, especially among vehicle crews. We find a BC 348 radio playing a song in the middle of the camp. This is an aircraft radio receiver, which infantry would not have and would not be broadcasting music like this. A phonograph would have been a better choice to put here if they wanted music. The song that is being played from the radio is Memories of Benny by John Danquart. This was released in 2004 as a part of the Big Band 1920s to 1970s album. We can find many tin cans with a ribbed aluminium design, which were not introduced until after World War II. The unit numbers on the Jeep showed them as being the 9th Vehicle of Baker Company, 83rd Reconnaissance Battalion, 3rd Armoured Division, but since they are in our camp, they should have the markings of our unit in the 29th Division. The Sherman tanks are the M4A2 model, but are misidentified as M4A3s in the game. The tanks also have a few errors in the modelling. The dent on the differential cover is too shallow, the engine deck is missing the grille doors, and there's a pistol port at the back right of the turret which didn't exist on this tank. The American used Shermans also completely lack any unit insignia, which is strange considering how most of this game's other vehicles have them. We are ordered to use an M1A1 Thompson.
Nichols, grab a Thompson from that crate in the supply tent.
However, when we pick it up, we carry it into battle in addition to our M1 Garand. No sane soldier would carry two primary weapons like this into combat, as it would mostly just be extra dead weight from having to carry the second gun and its ammo. As a private, we should just be armed with an M1 Garand. The gun has an unusually tall front sight, which our character uses to aim over the rear sight instead of properly through the peephole. The Thompson is treated as being closed bolt when it should be open bolt. And when reloading, the player doesn't press the mag release button. We also always see a bullet in the chamber and in the spent mag even when the gun was completely emptied. Many of the weapon's bullets are a strange silver grey or black shade rather than the usual brass or copper colour. There are no proper partial reload animations for the guns in this game. Our character always performs an empty reload by cocking the weapons, which will be unnecessary to do when the gun is not empty, as it would just cause the chambered bullet to eject, but even this fails to occur. The M1A1 in particular has a bolt hold open device that means we should not even need to pull the charging handle when empty.
We'll be providing ground support for Task Force C. We're coming in from the west flank.
Task Force C of the 29th Infantry Division pushed into Saint-Lô from the northeast, not from the west. Also, our characters leave their camp and drive northwest before arriving at the west end of Saint-Lô in about a minute. This would mean that our camp is very close to the town and to the southeast, which would put it in German territory, behind enemy lines, and in range of the immense artillery that the Germans shelled the town with. In reality, Task Force C's assembly area was located near Couvin, about 8 kilometers or 5 miles northeast of Saint-Lô. The task force left from there at 3 PM, and did not arrive in Saint-Lô until 3 hours later at 6 PM, due to them rendezvousing with the 1st Battalion 115th Infantry on the way and encountering a roadblock as well as harassing fire from enemy artillery and mortars. After our truck gets destroyed, we see a medic tending to the wounded. He is definitely supposed to be a medic as our sergeant calls him so. Medic! Despite this, he is wearing the game's version of a standard infantry uniform and is armed with a rifle. He should have a medical bag, extra canteens, medic yoke suspenders, and maybe an extra GP bag or old gas mask bag used to store additional medical supplies. Most medics in the Western Front were also unarmed and had Red Cross markings painted on their helmets, along with Red Cross brassards on their arms. Strangely, we do actually go on to see a more suitable medic model in this game, but it only features in a single later mission.
What unit you with, Private?
Guzzo, private first class.
Since Guzzo is a radio man, he should not be a private first class, but a technician 5th grade wearing D stripes instead.
3rd squad, our CO wanted back in Martinville.
If Guzzo's CO or commanding officer was killed, then he would have been replaced with a new one immediately and not sent into battle under no one's command. Also, upon hearing this, our Sergeant McCullen, who is an NCO and not a CO, takes it upon himself to order Guzzo to join his squad.
Alright, you're with us. Medic!
I'll stay with Santorres.
No, you're with me now.
Sergeant!
End of discussion, Private. Dixon! Take Huxley and backstop our armor. The rest of you, including you, are with me.
Guzzo for some reason accepts this and joins our squad not only in this battle but throughout all of the rest of the game's American levels too. Since Guzzo is in a different squad to us, he could and would deny Sergeant McCullen's orders here. Army Command would not let him join and stay with us just because a sergeant from a different squad to his said so. Also, Guzzo wouldn't even be assigned a regular infantry squad because he's using an SCR-300. This radio was used for long-range communications on a battalion level under the command of a major or captain. In typical Call of Duty fashion, the geography and build of Saint-Lô is completely off. When we enter the town, we see a scaled down version of the iconic Saint-Lô ramparts, but to get here from the west as it appears in game, we would have had to cross the Vier River, which is completely absent. There is also no such cemetery or church in front of and under the town ramparts. The closest one would be the Église Notre Dame, which was of a different design than what we see in game, and is located up and behind the ramparts. There is also the Église Sainte-Croix that Task Force C first arrived to during their attack, but this was located in the northeast and did not look like the game's one either. As we head further into the town, it just continues to not match with reality, and becomes evident that Treyarch created a completely fictional town, threw in some Saint-Lô landmarks like the ramparts, and then just called it a day. Also, as aforementioned, Saint-Lô was heavily bombed prior to the fighting in the town, and was called the capital of the ruins due to up to 95% of the town being destroyed. In game, we do see many of the buildings having bombing damage, but they are mostly still standing and do not represent the sheer scale of destruction seen in historical photos. The German soldiers in this mission are all Waffen-SS. In reality, the town was defended by Heer or army forces of the 352nd and perhaps 266th Infantry Divisions, in addition to paratroopers of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division. No SS troops were present. That said, for the few missions where SS soldiers were historically present, all of them wore the same oak leaf smocks. In reality, there will be much more variation depending on the specific unit, such as plain tree, blurred edge, and P-dot pattern smocks and uniforms. A significant number of SS troops would also wear just regular field grey uniforms. For the ones that do not wear helmet covers, we see that every single one of them have decals, which had stopped being put on the Stahlhelms earlier in the war and so should not be this common at this stage. Every one of the SS soldiers all have the same rank insignia of Unterscharführer, meaning that they are all NCO squad leaders of lower ranked enlisted squad members that do not exist in game. We can just about make out that they are wearing Heer belt buckles instead of SS ones. The SS forces universally wear badly modelled A-frames on their backs. These were more of an early war item and so should not be this common anymore. None of the game's Germans wear their standard issue entrenching tools. The safety switch on the Kart 98K is shown being in the on position, so how we are firing it is perplexing. Our character always loads a full 5-round clip into the Kart 98K, even when the rifle was not emptied. And we load the entire things in, including the clips themselves, which should have been removed. The first person model for the Kart 98K has no hood over the front sight, but then when seen in third person it does have a hooded front sight. This is something we will notice throughout the game, that the first and third person models of the guns don't quite match up. The third person models are often disproportionately too big and are lower poly and detailed. This is largely due to the reusing of assets from the last gen Call of Duty 2. The German soldiers throughout the entire game are armed with way too many MP40s. Only NCOs and sometimes assistant squad leaders would be armed with them. All German soldiers across the board carry rifle ammo pouches, regardless of if they are armed with MP40s or any other such weapon. When reloading, the player fails to press the mag release button. All of the Stielhandgranate still have their safety caps on when thrown. The picture shown for the Stielhandgranate in the game's bonus materials is actually just a naval handgranate smoke grenade. Call of Duty 3 was a rush product, being developed by Treyarch in just 8 months. This becomes quite evident when looking at aspects such as the AIs, who are especially dumb, often seen running straight into machine gun fire and shooting at nothing. The AIs also have unlimited ammo and sometimes no reload animations. Of the ones that do have reload animations, for our allies it consists of them loading an invisible clip into their weapon, even if it's a mag-fed one, while for the enemies they reload by doing a cocking motion over their firearm. We see a multitude of low-flying American P-47 fighters providing air support to our task force throughout this mission. There is no evidence to show this occurring during the actual assault. Throughout the game, the P-47s are often seen flying way too low to the ground and are all carrying fuel tanks, which by this point should be dropped to minimize the risk of igniting the fuel from ground fire and to remove the excess mass. The P-47s are seen shooting down a German Focke-Wulf 190. There was an attack on Saint-Lô from 5 German aircraft, but this occurred on the 19th after the town was taken, and there was no reports of any of these 5 aircraft getting shot down like the one in game does.
What's that tank doing just sitting there?
Taking cover if it's got any sense.
Guzzo, get down to that tank. Tell him you can spot targets.
Why me?
You're a radio op, aren't you? I'm not asking, Crusoe.
You pick out targets. I'll give the driver their position, alright?
Why do we need to spot targets for this tank? The crew would easily be able to see these targets themselves from this angle and range. If the tank commander was killed, then they would just pull back and get a Sherman with a functional commander up. And even if they couldn't do that, the gunners would still have a line of sight on these targets. Also, how is Guzzo's radio even linked to the tanks? Has he somehow connected the infantry telephone to his radio? Or connected to the tank squadron's leader radio? This whole sequence makes no sense and is just here simply to act as a task for the player to do.
Task Force C is moving out!
Task Force C's attack was indeed supported by a platoon of Shermans from the 747th Tank Battalion. However, the American armour also consisted of others, including M10 tank destroyers of Company B 803rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, M8 Greyhound armoured cars from 2 platoons of the 29th Cavalry Reconnaissance Troop, and subsequent M20 armoured utility cars of the 113th Cavalry Group. All of these are missing from the game. There were no German tanks in St. Lo during Task Force C's assault. The American armour was instead engaged by anti-tank, motor and artillery fire. The Panzer IVs have many small problems and are a hodgepodge of different variations. Most of the Panzer IVs in Normandy were the Auf H variant, which came standard with the Schurzen side skirts. These skirts were attached via U-brackets that were bolted onto the side of the hull. These are missing in game. They have turret searching skirts but no hull side skirts, which were more common with the later versions like the Auf J, as a result of supply issues and lack of metal to supply hull side skirts. The muzzle brake is slightly too long and wider than normal. The same can be said for the hull itself. The front is slightly too straight while it should angle downwards. The Panzer IVs do not have any divisional markings on them, and the camouflage pattern they all have looks too bright, using a bright tan instead of a darker yellow as the base. Whenever the tanks get destroyed, they are almost always seen completely exploding and turning to distorted charred wrecks. This did occur in reality in instances where the ammunition in the tank exploded. However, for the most part, their destruction should be less dramatic, with the majority of them suffering from brewing up from an ammo cook-off, but no explosion. Throughout the game, we find evidently too many swastika banners everywhere. We fight through various occupied French territories, not goddamn Nuremberg.
That's it, I'm falling back! Frank, put the gun down. Let's just all calm down here.
You're not crazy enough to shoot me!
Desertion's a capital offense, Guzzo. Shooting you won't be crazy. It'll be the sanest thing I've ever done.
Okay, let me get this right, Sergeant. You gave a completely invalid order to Guzzo to join your squad, and now you are threatening to kill him because he wants to leave? Yeah, if anyone's getting court-martialed here, it's you. German soldiers manning the MGs do not have any specific machine gunner equipment that they should carry on their web gear, like the MG Tascha, cleaning kit, pistol, etc. The machine guns are also at all times seen operated by just one soldier, when they would have been allocated a crew with an assistant and ammunition carrier. The MG42s do not have any ammo feeding into them, yet still somehow fire. All the mounted MGs in game fire unlimitedly, and although they do have a cooldown animation, there is still a complete absence of any barrel changes. The MG42 is a general purpose machine gun, but is incorrectly stated to be a light machine gun in the bonus materials. The town of Carentan is misspelled as Kertan on the road signs. In typical video game logic, we keep finding red fuel barrels conveniently placed around the enemies which blow up upon shooting. This is just a Hollywood myth. Shooting a fuel tank with regular bullets would cause no ignition or explosion and would just make it leak. We find Turnister Empfänger B radios among the German supplies. However, they are always seen missing their additional storage unit for the battery, cables and spare parts that they would usually be set up with. There was no enemy infantry counterattack at St. Lo. The Germans fought defensively before withdrawing west and south of the town.
The American army pushes through to the southwest, while the British, Canadian, and Polish advance from the northeast. The German-controlled territory in the middle comes to be known as the Falaise Gap.
The Falaise pocket was much larger than what we see here. This map is showing a very thin part of the Falaise pocket concerning only the 3 last levels of this game. The map shows Mont, which is just a scatter of houses, known collectively as a yedi. It is a smaller part of the village of Turn-sur-Dives, but this main village is not marked on the map, with the yedi seemingly being incorrectly shown as the name of the whole village. Lambert-sur-Dives is misspelled by having an S at the end of the word div.
Guy sticks a gun in my face. You don't think that's enough to buy me a transfer out of this unit?
Have you thought about writing your congressman?
That's very friggin' funny.
Gear up. We're going to Saint-Germain. The 90th is short-handed, so we're getting folded into their unit. Looks like your transfer request came through.
What? Guzzo should not need to put in a transfer request. He isn't in our squad. And are you seriously telling me that he complained to command about Sergeant McCullen's invalid order and death threat against him, and that the reaction was to officially transfer him into our squad and into the 90th Division, which we are changing to? Just no game. Also, it's incredibly unlikely that an infantry squad from the 29th would just be folded into a completely different division like this. Unit coercion standards prevented this, and if replacements were needed, which they were in both divisions at this point, they'd be freshly trained recruits from the States. This is a major inaccuracy done solely for narrative purposes to include the Battle of St. Lo in the beginning. The United States flag shown in the cutscenes is the 40-star version that officially existed for a total of 6 days when the US had 40 states in 1889. The stripes are also incorrect, with there only being 11 instead of 13. It should be the proper 48-star flag used during World War II. We are brought to partake in the attack on the island in Saint-Germain-sur-Seves on July 26th. The assault on this day was started by the 359th Infantry Regiment of the 90th Division at around 5:30 AM, over 5 hours before the 11 AM time presented in the game's title card. The weather for the mission is incorrect. July 26 showed clear sunny skies as air support was actively assisting ground troops during Operation Cobra. The developers seem to have based this weather on the large storm around this area, which subsequently flooded the lower section of Saint-Germain, creating the island. This storm occurred 4 days earlier during the 90th Division's attack here on July 22nd, and had cleared by the 26th. We start armed solely with a VAR. There would be 1 automatic rifleman per infantry squad, but in all the other American levels we are shown to be a rifleman with a Garand, and also a Thompson, but this latter weapon we should not have as already established. We would not be able to suddenly change our role in the squad to acquire a VAR, then to just lose it and turn back to being a rifleman for the next mission. The VAR is the original M1918 version, used more in the earlier stages of the war. Although not outright inaccurate to appear at this stage, the newer M1918A2 would be far more common. Also, for some reason, the gun is the M1918 model when we hold it in first person, but then the model changes to the A2 variant when seen in third person. A similar problem is present in the bonus materials, where it shows a picture of the M1918 model, but incorrectly claims it to be the M1918A2. When we melee, we can see that the right side of the VAR is a completely solid texture that does not include the gun's ejection port. The reload shows that both the spent and new magazines inserted always have no ammo in them. Our compass shows us crossing the Sèvres River by pushing west. There is only really one area on this river that we could cross by heading west, and there was never any crossings or bridges here anyway. Our forces of the 90th instead crossed further downstream while pushing south and southwest. Like in the last level, the landscape doesn't correspond to reality and is almost entirely fictional. This stone arch bridge crossing the river is too big and not based on any of the 3 that crossed the river to the island. The game presents the island itself as a high hill we have to fight up, when in reality it was much flatter. There are too many houses, as if the developers were trying to create a village which did not exist in this region outside of a small few scattered houses. And worst of all, we find a large enemy bunker complex on top of the fictional hill. Nothing like this exists in the actual battle here. The appearance of M5 Stuarts alongside our assault is inaccurate. Although one of the attached tank battalions, the 712th, had a light tank company with M5 Stuarts, this company didn't see combat on July 26th. Only Company C, which consisted of Shermans, were attached to a regiment that saw combat, the 357th Infantry Regiment. The unit markings on the M5 Stuarts indicate them as belonging to a unit that had no role in this battle, being the 15th Vehicle of Easy Company, 83rd Reconnaissance Battalion, 3rd Armoured Division. Our forces only wearing HVT uniforms makes a bit more sense for the 90th Division, who did wear them on a large scale, but we should still see M41s too. All of the other aforementioned uniform errors stand, including their helmets still having no divisional insignia. Sergeant McCullen even continues to wear his 29th Division helmet despite now being in the 90th. Huxley has gained a haversack and finally now has a helmet, but it is a German Stahlhelm, and he doesn't even wear it, choosing instead to have it hanging off him at all times. He is also armed with a Winchester Model 1897 trench gun. This shotgun was never used by frontline troops in Europe, only military police and rear echelon soldiers used it. The enemies we encounter are all Fallschirmjäger from assumedly the 6th Regiment 2nd Fallschirmjäger Division that fought here. The game fails to show any SS soldiers from the 2nd SS Das Reich Panzer Division who are also in this area, however. The Fallschirmjäger are all wearing smocks with a poorly done camo that does not match what any worn by the Luftwaffe. They should have a mix of Luftwaffe Splintertarn and Sumpftarn camos, with regular green smocks also being prevalent. All the Fallschirmjäger wear the same green plain shade of M38 helmet with decals, which should again not be common. Most of their helmets would be camouflage with either covers or paint and other camouflage. At this point in the war, many Fallschirmjäger were also issued regular M40 or M42 helmets. We should see some of these for variation. None of the Fallschirmjäger have visible tunics under their smocks. We should see the tunic colors stick out. Way too many of the Fallschirmjäger are armed with both unscoped and scoped versions of the FG42. These were quite rare, and if they were issued, only one member of a section got them. The ZF4 scope has an incorrect reticle that does not match with the German number 1 or number 4 reticles they used in reality. The FG42's spent mags always have ammo in them even when doing an empty reload. The casings are for some reason half coloured with the same reddish copper shade of the projectile bullet. And the weapon lacks a charging handle, with our character cocking the gun by just gliding his hand over it.
We'll split up and flank. Half the squad will go left.
This confirms that our squad consists entirely of just our 5 characters. A US Army rifle squad consisted of 12 men in reality. It is often seen in media like this that the protagonist squad is shrunk down for narrative purposes, but it is inaccurate nonetheless. The defending Germans in this battle performed multiple counterattacks on the 90th. None of these are present in game. The counterattacks were also supported by both Panzer IV and Panther tanks, but we only see Panzer IVs in this level. Throughout many of the missions, we find the USAN M8HC smoke grenades among the German supplies. These could be trying to represent captured equipment, but we simply find far too many among the enemies for this to be believable. Not to repeat that they are the post-war models anyway. They should just be the German equivalent instead, the Naval Hand Granate 39. Also among the Germans, we keep locating the earlier seen American BC-348 aircraft radio receivers, which we can even hear an angry German talking through.
We need support here! Say again! We need support!
Wow, Guzzo, some radio man you are. Too bad the user on the end of the radio will have no idea of our position, who's calling, and support with what. It is possible that Guzzo is calling for any nearby unit who could hear, but without a location given, they still wouldn't be able to help. Despite this, support is given, with the timely arrival of an M5 Stuart, which somehow penetrates and destroys a Panzer IV Auf H or J with one shot from the front. This must have been an incredibly lucky shot, as the M5's 37mm gun can just barely penetrate the front of a Panzer IV Auf H or J, not to mention how again, of course, it causes the Panzer to completely blow up.
Doors open, boys! Say again! Hostiles taken out! Road is clear!
The aftermath of this level is incorrect. It was only on the following day, July 27th, that the Sev Island was cleared following the retreat of the German force. The British campaign opens with our Special Air Service or SAS characters in the Tarrant-Rushton airfield, driving to the aircraft that will paradrop them into France. Royal Air Force Tarrant-Rushton was primarily for glider operations. Considering this mission calls for paradropping, this doesn't make sense. Granted, this airfield was used by the Special Operations Executive, but this was much later in the war. It should be the Royal Air Force Thamesford station instead. As to be expected, the Tarrant-Rushton airfield is incorrectly depicted, with it consisting pretty much of just one runway surrounded by generic buildings and hills. The real airfield was much larger, with 3 interlocking runways that had no such hills surrounding it. We see American CCKW 352 trucks on this British airfield. A period standard British truck like one of the Bedford models would be more appropriate. Also on the base we see German Flak 88s. Historical photos do not even show any AA guns being next to the base's runways like this. The mission states that it's 11:45 PM in the night. However, the sky is too bright for such a time, looking like it's just past sundown, which would be around 9:30 PM in July in the UK. The sky continues to be too bright even as we travel to France a few hours later. Corporal Keat and all the other SAS troops wear Denison smocks that look quite bad. The colour tones are off and the camo pattern is also wrong. The real smocks would look like this. Major Ingram wears a beige or tan beret. This was the old SAS beret before it was replaced by the maroon one that Keat and the rest of the SAS troops have. Also, someone needs to tell these troops how to properly wear a beret. It looks like they're wearing cook hats instead of actual British berets. All of the Halifax bombers have the squadron code of PM, indicating that they are a part of either number 103 Squadron or number 20 Squadron. However, 103 Squadron was tasked with flying strategic bombing missions over Germany using Avro Lancasters and were stationed at Royal Air Force El Chambois, while number 20 Squadron was based in Trichinopoli, India. These jeeps have Allied identification stars on their bonnets. This was generally not done by British forces.
Little present for the Boche. We call her Vera. Her twin over there is Lynn. It's the usual deal. Pre-dawn insertion. Our man on the ground is a Marquis named LaRoche. Decent fellow for a Frenchman. He'll take us to meet up with the French resistance.
The British campaign of this game is loosely based on Operation Kipling. Like what the game depicts, Operation Kipling saw first SAS troops of C Squadron drop into the Yon department to carry out coordinated strikes with the French resistance, while utilizing jeeps armed with Vickers K machine guns. There are a number of things off in the game however, first being the date, as this operation started on the 13th of August, not the 21st of July.
We're wheels up in an hour, so grab your kit and load in.
Wait, that's the entire brief, and we are only being told it now, an hour before takeoff? No, we would have been properly briefed long before now. Treyarch were good enough to include the suspension carriages for carrying jeeps with Halifax bombers. Although cool to see, it was an experimental idea, and most of the SAS troops involved in Operation Kipling were dropped in with C-47s. The canopy of the parachute we drop in with seems a little low to the player. The British parachute GQX type has 28 rigging lines attached to the canopy, but for whatever reason there is only 5 per side here. These rigging lines should be attached to 4 web risers for the user to hold onto, which is not present here. Also, considering the height of the trees we crash into, it's odd that we hit the ground instead of the canopy getting stuck in the branches. The Sten Mark II is depicted as being open bolt when it should be closed bolt. There is always a round seen in the chamber even when the gun was emptied. Once again, our character does not press the mag release button and instead just rips the magazine out with brute force. And the spent mags and new mags inserted never have any ammo in them. There is an evident lack of variation for the French Maquis fighters. The vast majority of them wear the same white button shirt with khaki trousers and armbands. They should have a more diverse selection of civilian clothing, also mixed with some Adrian helmets, and maybe even captured German tunics and helmets. Almost all of the French Maquis are seen armed with Sten SMGs. They would have a much more varied loadout at this stage, including other British supplied guns like Lee Enfields and Brens, captured German arms encompassing the MP40 and MG42, French firearms including the Moss 36 and FM 2429, as well as American supplied weapons such as the M1 carbine. The French also drop US Mark IIs as their only grenade. Although supplied to them in some capacity, they would mostly have others like British mill bombs and captured German grenades. Throughout the British campaign, we encounter a total of 4 SAS troops, consisting of our character, Sergeant Doyle, Corporal Keat and Major Ingram who we fight alongside, in addition to Private Wilkins who we see get killed upon landing. We also utilize a total of 2 jeeps. The actual Operation Kipling saw 107 SAS troops drop in with 47 jeeps. Ingram and Keat always wear their berets throughout the game, when they should be wearing helmets, especially when landing and in direct combat. Wilkins and Doyle do wear Mark II paratrooper helmets, but they for some reason have American M1 chin straps instead of the correct canvas chin straps. From the amount of times that Keith fires his Bren gun from the shoulder, you might begin to think he has superhuman strength. Firing it like this is near impossible, let alone during an entire mission. Doctrine would also determine that such a small team as this would not even carry a Bren, since it was a section-based weapon. Keith would just carry a Lee Enfield rifle or Sten SMG here instead. The combat in this level is highly fictionalized and exaggerated. The actual SAS troops of Operation Kipling encountered very few German troops, and acted with much more covertness, undertaking patrolling, setting up ambushes, and subsequently linking with other allied armies. All of the Heer soldiers are wearing the same shade of M40 uniform. Although this uniform was still prevalent on the Western Front, it is worth noting that we should also find M36, M42, M43, and summer M42 HVT uniforms mixed in with them too in different shades of Feldgrau. None of them have any rank insignia, meaning they apparently are all privates. We see no other higher ranks among them. Every one of the Heer soldiers are wearing Y straps, and all carry almost their entire load of equipment on them. Y straps were not actually universally worn by regular infantry as the game makes out, and since these Germans would be rear echelon forces of stationary units who we catch by surprise in the middle of the night, they would have most of their equipment stored locally and would not be carrying it on them the whole time. Since we are so far behind the front lines and in the heart of France, it would not be out of this world to also encounter some French Vichy troops here. We locate the American Winchester Model 1897 trench gun among the Germans, despite the Wehrmacht never adopting any shotguns during World War II. Since these are rear-line troops, an older German Mauser rifle or SMG like the MP38 could take its place. The trench gun is incorrectly modelled with the ejection port mirrored to the left side, and its hammer appears to be permanently stock-cocked when firing. In typical Call of Duty fashion, the shotgun has a pathetic range in contrast to reality. The Opel Blitz trucks lack any unit markings, including not having any military branch acronyms on their license plates. Many of the vehicles being driven around clearly do not have anyone driving them. When we find our Jeep Vera, she's unpacked from the suspension carriage. Did the Germans do this? If so, then why was the Jeep just left out in the open and not brought inside or away for inspections? Especially since later we drive through a small motor pool. Our character does not once use the gear stick when driving the Jeep, and the third-person view shows us making sharp turns by barely turning the steering wheel. The firing rate of the Vickers K machine guns on the Jeep are way too low. These guns could fire up to 1,200 rounds a minute. For some reason, there is only one instance, being at the start of the subsequent Les Ormes level, that these MGs are given a more suitable RPM. The drum magazines on the Vickers K MG should rotate as they fire, but they stay static in game, even when we use the MG in first person in a later mission. It would be incredibly unlikely that these rearguard units would have such quick access to so many Panzer IV auf HRJs. If not outright removed, then Beuta Panzers or outdated tanks could take their place, because more capable Panzers like this would be needed at the front lines. Although they are there primarily just to help guide the player down the allocated path, there are simply far too many road signs everywhere, especially given we are driving mostly on back roads in the 1940s. Also, none of these signs match with any period French ones, and are instead seemingly based on modern American ones. For example, no such sharp turn danger signs like these were ever introduced in France until 1952. We encounter an upside down sign indicating a Noville being 7 kilometers away. There is no such Noville that exists in this area of France. The closest one would be one of the 4 villages called Noville, all of which being in Belgium, or the Noville municipality in Switzerland. In typical video game logic, all the vehicles blow up upon being shot with just a couple bullets. A lot of the vehicles and other things also just randomly blow up for no apparent reason, even when they're not being shot at. The explosives we plant on the Flak 88s are American TNT charges. We can even see USA written on them upside down. The geography of this level seems to once again be fictional generic French countryside. There is no such manor or train station of these builds anywhere near the village of Tussy that this game claims this mission takes place in. The rocket launcher Marcel uses to blow up the Panzer IV is an M9A1 bazooka, which was not first introduced until 2 months later in September 1944. Marcel also for some reason throws it away after firing, despite it being reloadable and usable later if more rockets are obtained. We switch back to the American perspective to partake in the battle for Mayenne. This mission sees our 90th Division forces recreate the actions of the 357th Infantry Regiment by crossing the Mayenne River with boats and preventing the destruction of the town's last standing bridge. The problem is that in the previous American level at Seves Island, our squad took the place of the 359th Infantry Regiment. So which one are we? We would not be able to just willy-nilly switch regiments like this.
You read up on those aircraft bombs?
Yeah, those things are mighty dangerous.
This indicates that the soldiers knew of the bridge being prepared for demolition well in advance, but troopers of the 90th Division were not aware of the bridge's planned destruction until they reached the bridge itself.
Our job's to take the bridge as the convoy acts as our decoy from the opposite side.
So we get no armor support.
Jerry will blow the bridge at the first sight of them. That's why Huxley here is going to disarm the bombs before the Krauts can detonate them.
Whose brilliant plan was this?
General George S. Patton's.
This would be too intricate of a plan for a general of such a high level as George S. Patton. The plan would have been brought up by Brigadier General William G. Weaver, who was the assistant commanding officer for the 90th Division. When we arrive at Mayenne, we are shown the title card, saying that it is 8:30 PM. This battle took place earlier, with the town being successfully liberated by about 6 PM. The combat in this level is over-exaggerated. We are presented with a slow house-to-house fight from stiff prepared German resistance in the west of the town before we reach the river. The 90th didn't encounter this and they advanced to the river swiftly, taking the Germans by complete surprise. In fact, they were so quick that it led to a German staff car, unaware of the enemy presence, advancing from behind and right past the Americans at the bridge, who then lit up the car. Even after Mayenne was liberated, German vehicles continued to enter the town, not knowing it had been taken, and Luftwaffe bombers continued bombing miles west of the town where they thought the Americans still were. In the levels where we only face Wehrmacht forces, we often find many Stahlhelms with SS oak leaf camo covers. There are a bunch of aircraft seen flying over us, and we can even hear an air raid siren throughout the assault. There is no evidence to support this. Like all the other levels, the landscape doesn't correspond to reality. However, some effort has been made this time. There is a castle overlooking the riverbank, but it didn't look like this in reality. There are also two bridges near each other, and like in the game, it's the second bridge when looking from the castle which was the last one standing. But they are too close to each other, and there is some space and some houses between the broken bridge and the castle in reality. The town itself is way too small and compressed. The church in the background on the same side of the castle, although correctly placed, doesn't look like the real one, and in addition we should see the remains of the third bridge in the distance when looking down the river to the south. We get a closer look at the game's P-47 model from the one crashed in the river here. It is indicated as being in the 78 fighter group. However, the 78 saw very little action in Normandy during July and August of 1944, as the group had trained for long-range bomber protection, and combat records do support this, showing numerous sorties into Germany with the occasional sortie for fighting sweeps in Normandy. In reality, the river crossing with boats was done much further south of the town, not in the middle of it. Plus, it was conducted by two whole battalions from the 557th Regiment, not just two boatloads of men we see in game. There were so many soldiers crossing that some had to rip apart fences to make makeshift paddles for the boats. When we reach the other side of the river, we just immediately encounter more heavy German resistance. In reality, the Americans were greeted by a French farmer on the opposite bank of the river, who directed a Captain Max Coker to a group of Germans eating in a barn. Coker and his men took these Germans prisoner and marched them up the river to link up with the other 90th forces while singing the star-speckled banner and being cheered on by French civilians. There is no evidence of the Germans using naval Werfers during this battle. They instead engaged the Americans with a Flak 88 and 20mm flak gun. The naval Werfers are in a funny position. Being where they are, they would have a poor arc of fire due to the buildings in front of them and to the sides, not to mention the debris and dust that would kick up after firing. The crews are also sitting way too close to the launchers. Naval Werfers were fired remotely using a wire, since the backblast would incinerate anyone sitting close by. In a confined space like this, the naval Werfers being fired would cause everyone inside the courtyard to get burnt. There was a German tank present near the bridge, however it was on the west side, not the east, and it was destroyed by an AT gun, not by having charges planted on it. It is unknown exactly what model of tank it was, but it would have been of the 9th Panzer Division, which consisted mostly of older Panzer IVs and Panzer IIIs. Once the tank blows up, 2 crewmen are seen bailing. How they survive such a massive ammo explosion is anyone's guess. They also wear regular infantry uniforms instead of any appropriate tanker uniforms. Before Huxley gets shot, he is seen firing his trench gun like it's a Garand, and even has the firing sound of it.
So, they're just regular UXBs? Yeah.
UXB is a British abbreviation and possibly a post-war one. During the Blitz, the British would refer to unexploded bombs as blinds. Americans would have used the term UXO for unexploded ordnance, or duds. By the time the Boat River crossing was complete, the 90th Forces had already taken this bridge, yet in game it is still in German control and we see no other American forces anywhere. For whatever reason, we fight back across the river where we came from, with there being Germans advancing on us from the west end, which was where the Americans were set up and advanced from in reality. Yeah, this just makes zero sense. What are these? Nuclear bombs? On a serious note though, reports on how big and how many bombs were on the bridge vary, but none state anything as high as these overkill 1,000-pound looking ones. And why on earth are there Turnister Empfänger B radios wired to the bombs? Like, what purpose could these possibly serve? Sergeant McCullen getting killed on the bridge while defusing a bomb mimics the actions of an engineer Private McRacken. Of course, Sergeant McCullen and the rest of our squad are fictional characters, and to be more precise historically wise, McRacken was advancing with another engineer and a Lieutenant Lombardi behind a tank when he was blown apart by the 20mm flak gun. Also, I just want to point out that these are Sergeant McCullen's last words.
Tell Guzzo. Tell him. Go to hell.
Like, bro, what did Guzzo do to deserve this? The Canadian campaign sees us fight as light infantry forces of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada Regiment in the 4th Canadian Armoured Division. We are shown to be partaking in the Operation Totalize attack on the village of Tilly-la-Campagne on the night of the 7th to the 8th of August. Straight off the bat, this assault was conducted by British forces of the 51st Infantry Division and the 148th Regiment Royal Armour Corps, none of which we see in this level. That's right, we are not just a wrong unit, we are not even the right nation. On this night, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada were closer to Caen, having started moving from Vaucelles at 1:30 am and stopping at Fluissa 1 at 3 am. The developers probably confused the Canadian Highlanders with the British 7th Battalion of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, part of the 51st Infantry Division, which saw combat on the Caen Falaise Road during the night and the next day. This is honestly such a ridiculous, massive, lazy mix-up and not a great way to start the Canadian campaign. The Canadians all wear Mark IV turtle helmets, denoted by the low rivet. They also have strange M1 style 2-piece chin straps instead of the correct elastic chin straps. The Mark IV did not begin production until 1945. They should instead have the Mark II Brodies and Mark III turtle helmets. The Canadian pattern 37 blouse is incorrect. They all have a weird grey-brown tone instead of the proper greener tone, and the breast pockets are too rounded in contrast to the more triangular shape they had. A number of the soldiers have no rank insignia despite having ranks like corporal on their name overlays. Many of the Canadians are wearing Webley revolver ammo pouches, despite no revolvers existing in this game. A typical Canadian infantryman would carry his rifle clips in a bandolier and or in the universal ammo pouches. Our radio man, Private Baron, does not have any pouches whatsoever. All of them are wearing what is most likely supposed to be ammo low boots with gaiters. The Canadians were not a fan of the gaiters and often did not wear them. The taller invasion boots should also be prevalent at this stage. The Canadians are also missing a number of gear items that most should have, including the gas capes which they used as ponchos at this stage, the spike bayonets, and the canteen carriers. A lot of them were also known to have customized their trousers to hold a Fairbairn Spikes fighting knife. The kangaroo armoured personnel carriers we utilise in this mission did see use during Operation Totalize as part of their debut, but only 100 or so were converted and only used by the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, not the 4th Canadian Armoured Division that our characters are from. The kangaroos in the gameplay have Belgian Army 16th Armoured Division insignia. Like, what? This unit was obviously not even active since the German conquest of Belgium. Was this some Belgian dev having a laugh? This is so wrong that it has to be a troll. The Sherman tanks that accompany us have Canadian 4th Armoured Division markings in the cutscenes, but these then disappear in the gameplay, with them just being the same unit insignia lacking one that the Americans use in game. The intro cutscene shows the correct date on the night of August 7th, but then the title card incorrectly claims that Operation Totalize began on August 1st. The Browning M2HB does not have any ammo feeding into it, yet still somehow fires endlessly. The landscape is again totally wrong. The landscape around Tilly-la-Campagne is more open with a lot of fields, very few woods, and the Confalais road is straight. The hill we fight up could take inspiration from Hill 195, which was the first major action of the Argyne and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada on August 10th, but even this wasn't a big attack like depicted in the game. Worst of all though, there are no industrial complexes like this anywhere in the area of Tilly-la-Campagne. It and the entire fight over it in the second half of this level is entirely fictional. Tilly-la-Campagne saw a 5-battle campaign for its capture, and so was completely devastated by artillery and aircraft bombing by the time of its capture. The village and game, especially the fictional factory district, are way too intact. We encounter Waffen SS forces in this level supported by tanks. Although Tilly-la-Campagne was defended by men of the 1st SS Panzer Division prior to this assault, they had since been replaced with air forces of the 89th Infantry Division by the time of Operation Totalize. We drive past a couple of destroyed King Tigers. However, there were no King Tigers in this sector. The only battalion that had King Tigers were the 503rd SS Heavy Tank Battalion, which was engaged in combat with Canadians, but they were deployed in the western sector over 5 kilometers away, not near the village of Tilly-la-Campagne. The level sees us take Tilly-la-Campagne on the night of August 7th to the 8th in a single attack before then fending off a large German counterattack.
Jerry set up a command post in an industrial compound nearby.
Well, then that's where we'll make our stand against Jerry's counterattack.
In reality, the village was not captured until after 7 AM in the morning on August 8th, so not during the night, and there was no such counterattack. The Bren in first person is modelled on the Mark I, with it even being written upside down on the receiver. Despite this, it has the Mark II's fixed cocking handle, with the third person model also having the Mark II's folding leaf rear sight. The charging handle does not move when pulling it back during a reload. And the Bren's mags always have ammo in them even when doing an empty reload. The Canadians use American Mark II grenades instead of the mill bombs they used in actuality. We also start by default with the US post-war AN M8HC smoke grenades. They should instead be British made ones like the number 77 bursting, number 79 immersion, and number 80 bursting smoke grenades. Too many of the Canadians are armed with Brens. There would only really be one of these per 10-man infantry section. There is also a complete absence of Stens, even though there would be one of these allocated to each corporal of a section. We see a number of soldiers that are too highly ranked to be directly leading individual sections on the front lines. These include junior officers like Lieutenant Ruby Shu, who will be leading entire platoons. The German cars have Wehrmacht Heer license plates only. There are no SS or Wehrmacht Luftwaffe license plates even in the levels where we face those forces. The explosives we use are the American TNT charges again. All of the Panzerschrecks are the RPZB-54 versions without the blast shield. This model was already outdated and replaced by the more well-known RPZB-54 with the blast shield by this time. The Panzerschreck should not function as we do not connect the wire to the contact leads for electrical ignition of the rocket motor. Given that a Panzerschreck is 65 inches long, while the average World War II soldier was 68 inches tall, reloading like this would probably require a box to stand on or the muzzle to be shoved into the ground. Panzerschrecks would be allocated a crew with a dedicated loader to help overcome such issues. The Panzerschreck appears as the only German explosive launcher in game, even though the Panzerfaust was much more common. The Tiger tanks are for some reason always missing the rear side skirts. They also have the Panzerleger insignia on them, despite Panzerleger not being in the sector during the battle for Normandy. Panzerleger only had 15 Tiger tanks during the Normandy campaign, but none of these were used due to ongoing mechanical issues.
The Canadians continue their push south on the Falaise Road, forcing the Germans to fall back towards Falaise, while the Polish 1st Armoured Division guards the Canadians' western flank.
The Polish 1st Armoured Division defended the eastern flank of the Canadians, not the western. When we are introduced to our Polish tank crew, it says that they are in Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil on August 8 at 12 PM. However, the 1st Polish and 4th Canadian Armoured Divisions would not reach their starting lines, which included Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil, until 1:30 PM that afternoon. By this time, the 1st Polish Armoured Division was further north closer to Caen. As to be expected from a COD game, all of the Polish soldiers speak English with accents.
But soldiers are not dancers.
Some of their lines are even recycled from Call of Duty 2's Soviet levels. This isn't a case of the game just translating everything for the player either, since we go on to see Polish and Canadians fully communicating in English later.
So maybe we not wait. Maybe we go right after Rick and his tanks. We are closest.
Close is dangerous.
Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil would be under attack at this point by several panzers, including 101st SS Heavy Tank Battalion Commander Michael Wittmann. So why it is so quiet and why our crew is just waiting here makes no sense.
So we cut Richter's supply line. For that, we rely on the British.
How do the Polish know that the SAS are conducting some sabotage mission over 400 kilometers away? SAS missions were incredibly secret, and it's highly unlikely that frontline combatants from an entirely different allied nation would know about them. We are then brought to said British sabotage mission on a fuel plant in Mont. This level is loosely based on the attacks on Le Télots oil shale mine and fuel plant known as the Scullion raids. When I say loosely based, I mean really loosely however, since there are a lot of things off. Starting with the location, as Le Télots mine and plant is not actually in Mont, but rather on the outskirts of it, just less than a kilometer away, in the Saint-Fargeau commune. The date is also very off. The last British raid on the facilities at Le Télots took place in August of 1943, about a year before the game's date and Operation Kipling. The British raids on the mine and plant at Le Télots were led by SOE operatives in groups of 6, not our group of 3 fictional SAS personnel. The appearance of the French Maquis raiding the plant with us is also quite inaccurate. Local resistance did attack this plant, but not alongside the British raiders. We start by default armed with both our Sten and a Lee Enfield rifle. Again, it makes no tactical sense for a trooper to bring 2 weapons into combat like this, and there is no explanation provided for how we, as well as most of the French Maquis, even obtained these Lee Enfields, since there were none present in the last British level where we dropped in. Depending on if you shoot 5 or more rounds, our character will always load 1 or 2 entire 5-round clips into the Lee Enfield, regardless of if there is ammo still in the rifle. Despite being one of, if not the single most famous British weapon of all time, the Lee Enfield rifle is shown in front of an American flag in the game's bonus materials. Throughout this level, we fight the German military police or Feldgendarmerie, as evident by their cornet, arm patch and cuff title. However, in reality, the area was under the jurisdiction of the Vichy French milice of Mont, as well as Luftwaffe ground personnel who manned AA guns around the area. They have the Feldjägerkorps Garnet, but the Feldgendarmerie arm patch and cuff title. These are 2 different units that would not wear each other's insignia like this. We encounter way too many enemies in this level. The scale of fighting seen in the Scullion raids was not this large. It would not even make sense for this crazy amount of Germans to be stationed in such a plant far behind the front lines. Despite being the morning of a working day, there are no workers seen on the plant at all. The militiamen guarding the site actually executed a number of the workers here in retaliation for the raids. As to be expected, Le Télots mine and fuel plant in-game is not modelled on the real one and seems to just be a fictional generic one. We encounter a SD KFZ-251 auf D half-track. Its usage by the Feldgendarmerie is incorrect, as they would instead be a light unit with trucks, cars and motorbikes. All of the German half-tracks have a 16th Panzer Division insignia on them. This division was fighting on the Eastern Front in 1944. When escaping, we drive past a multitude of Panzer IVs, which are even more out of place for military police units. The only unit that would have armour this far from the front lines would be the 325th Security Division, but they would be in Paris, several miles away. In the cutscene after the level, we see a signpost that indicates Bastogne being nearby. Bastogne is in Belgium, over 350 kilometers or 217 miles away from here. We also see a sign with Centerville on it. The only locations that go by this name are all in the continent of America. It could also just be referring to its French translation for downtown or town center, but even then such a sign would be found in a town, not in the countryside. We see the American trench gun suddenly appearing among the French Maquis, despite the shotgun never being supplied to them in reality.
7 kills in as many days.
The 1st Polish Armoured Division only arrived at Normandy on the 1st of August 1944. However, the area between the beaches and Caen were filled with constant traffic jams. The Polish didn't reach their rendezvous point until the 6th of August, making it physically impossible for our crew to have obtained 7 kills in as many days.
Air support is arriving. We're pushing into town.
Throughout this level, Allied air support is mentioned and seen numerous times. There was American air support provided to the Polish at this time. However, it missed its target and actually hit the Polish and nearby Canadians. It was a massive accidental case of friendly fire, where around 12:55 PM, 12 US B-17s caught most of the Polish in their bombing run, resulting in over 65 killed and 250 wounded, as well as losing 55 vehicles and a considerable amount of ammunition. This is not shown or even mentioned in game. The title card states the attack as starting at 12:30 PM, when in reality, due to the American B-17 bombing forcing the Polish to delay the attack, they didn't move out from Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil until 1:35 PM. All of the Polish armour in this mission are Sherman VC Fireflies that are incorrectly called Sherman VC-1 Fireflies in the game's bonus materials. The Firefly is a decent model, but it has a few features that are mashed together, creating this Franken Firefly. The spacing between the bogies and the wheels seems squished. However, it does have the longer hull to house the larger multi-bank engine. The rear seems to be based on the M4A2 model, as it lacks the rear doors, but the engine deck itself only has the large hatch and no grille. The hull machine gun was removed from Fireflies, making extra space for ammunition, and the port would typically be plugged up with a slab of extra armour, but they are still seen on these models. A few extra things are also missing that were common between Fireflies. The turret is missing a loader's hatch, the travel lock that would be on the back of the tank is absent, and so are the fittings for additional track links on the front of the hull, as well as the storage box that was attached to the back of the engine for additional storage. The bridge rating can be seen on the front right of the Firefly, which incorrectly says 40, it should be 33. While the Sherman Firefly was capable of carrying 77 shells, design features of the tank meant only 23 rounds were easily and readily available when the tank was in action. Because this is a video game, we fire the cannon and the MG endlessly though. The coaxial 30 cal M1919 has a way too high fire rate. The first person mode gives us this weird view as if we are prone on top of the middle of the turret with binoculars to our eyes, something that no sane tanker would do in direct combat. Since our character, Bohater, is supposed to be the tank's driver, we should get his perspective like how it was in Call of Duty Finest Hour. Most of the game's tanks are way too strong, especially the Tigers, which take at least 4 shells fired at point blank to destroy, where our Firefly's 17-pounder gun should be able to penetrate them easily. There should be more variation of armour for the Polish forces. They had 154 Shermans of different types, 59 Cromwells and 33 Stuart tanks, which are neglected from the game. The British and Canadians had roughly 5,000 M4A2 Shermans delivered between 1942 and 1945, with substantially less converted to Fireflies. We should also be seeing more of the Sherman 1, M4, 2, M4A1, and 5 M4A4 variants, as more of these types were delivered. The Fireflies themselves should be separated into different squads, as the British had trained each armoured regiment to operate with both Fireflies and 75mm armed Shermans integrated into each troop, which were 3 tanks strong, with 5 troops making up a squadron. We shouldn't be fighting any Panther tanks in this region, as the only tanks the 1st Polish Armoured Division encountered at this time were different variants of Panzer IVs and Tiger 1s of the 101st Heavy Tank Battalion and 12th SS Panzer Division. The Panthers we engage are also a weird mix of variations all joined into one. The driver's vision port is the older AUF A's, but the hull machine gun is the newer AUF G's designed with a simple ball mount. It has the chin guard protecting the lower segment of the gun's mantlet. These were not introduced until the following month of September 1944. And all of these Panthers are missing their side skirts, which were standardized post 1943. All of the tanks are seen operating and engaging each other way too close. Actual tank engagements occurred at a much larger distance of over 500 meters or so, in line with their doctrine. The level sees us steamroll through the German armor, single-handedly destroying dozens of tanks. This is largely just a game wanting to give the player a power fantasy, but it is still worth noting that the Polish attack from Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil had a completely different outcome compared to what we see here. In reality, the Poles took heavy losses, losing 57 tanks and only destroying 6 panzers in return. The attack was poorly planned, as a few hours before was the aforementioned friendly bombing run on their positions. The only reason for victory was because the Canadians and British had outflanked the Germans, and rather than risk being surrounded, they instead retreated. Something that we will evidently notice throughout all of the levels set in the countryside is that the landscape is too hilly. This area of Normandy was a lot more flat with big open fields. As mentioned previously, the 101st Heavy Tank Battalion did not have any King Tigers amongst them at this time, so Richter's Tiger should be the Tiger 1. This mission is called the Black Baron, which is a nickname that was given to tank ace Michael Whitman, who was killed on this day near Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil. However, for some reason he is absent and replaced with this fictional Richter character in game. Although the Polish armoured were one of many who claimed responsibility for killing Michael Whitman, the accepted narrative is that it was British and Canadian forces that destroyed Whitman and his armoured counterattack. While chasing Richter, we secure a village. It seems to be a fictionalized version of Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil, judging by the location given in the title card, plus the fact that Michael Whitman's stand-in Richter dies in the region of it, and how the church closely matches with the real one in Saint-Aignan. This village was already taken by the Allies on the previous night of August 7th, however. During this time on the 8th, the Polish 1st Armoured Division were instead fighting in the countryside a few kilometers south of Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil. They did not take any villages until the following day of August 9th, when they liberated Kubicore. We see a bunch of American soldiers running past Germans around the village, even though there were no US ground forces involved in Operation Totalize. Jakovich, Kowalski, Rodinsky, Ulan and our character Buhater getting out of the Firefly once we defeat Richter here confirms that there are 5 men in the tank. However, the Firefly could only hold 4 crew members. We are brought back to our American squad to fight in the forest of Écouves. We see that Dixon is our new sergeant, and he is now wearing a helmet with the 29th Infantry Division symbol on it. Did he steal this from McCullen? They've been embedded with the 90th now since St. Lo a whole month ago. You're telling me he had the time to sew on his new sergeant stripes but couldn't find another helmet? Once again, the dates do not match up. The main clearing of the Écouves forest by the 90th Division occurred on the 14th of August, not the 11th. We start with both a M1 Garand and a M1903A4 Springfield. The Springfield snipers would be carried by a designated sharpshooter. I understand that the game wants us to play with more varied loadouts, but historically it makes no sense why our private keeps changing weapons and carrying 2 of them. He should just be armed with an M1 Garand throughout. The scope is incorrect. It has the rear adjusting knobs of the unearthal scope, while the rest of it looks like an elongated Weaver scope. In a possible bad attempt to recreate the Lyman Alaskan scope, it should just be the regular Weaver scope. The reticle of the scope is the same incorrect one as the German ZF4. It should look like this instead. We face both Heer soldiers and Fossenjäger in this level. The Germans in this forest consisted of Heer forces of the 9th and 116th Panzer Divisions. No Fossenjäger were present. We begin to see Gewehr 43s among the Germans. A few of these here or there would be good to see. However, for whatever reason, they only appear in this and the following level, where they completely replace all of the standard Kart 98Ks, making them far too prevalent. The Gewehr 43 was both capable of magazine and clip feeding. However, during the later years of the war, magazines got rarer and rarer. As a result, they opted for 5-round clips. Although magazines did still get used, it should be 2 mags and 2 to 5 clips per soldier, instead of just only using mags like we do in game. There is still ammo in the Gewehr even after emptying it. And the sights on all of them are misaligned. The bonus material states that the Gewehr 43 was, quote, the first successful semi-automatic rifle adopted by the German army in World War II, based on captured Russian Tokarev SVT-40 rifles. This is not exactly true though. The design of the Gewehr 43 was primarily based on that of its predecessor, the Gewehr 41, but with an improved short-stroke pistol gas system similar to that of the SVT-40. Whether you would consider the Gewehr 41 as a successful semi-auto rifle or not is a matter of subjectivity, but up to 120,000 of them were built and used in World War II. The after-action report for the 90th Division only mentions slight stiff resistance in this forest. The fighting here is merely an afterthought, but in this level we see sophisticated trench networks and even underground bunkers. The Germans were under retreat and would not have the time to construct such fortifications. The after-action reports also mention nothing about a supply depot hidden in the forest that the Americans destroyed. We come across a bunch of destroyed American vehicles in the forest. These are most likely supposed to be from the elements of the French 2nd Armoured Division that did fight in this forest, as the game mentions.
I thought the French had already cleared this area.
The Frenchies must have missed them.
Problem is that these vehicles still have their USA markings on them instead of the French ones, and there is also a lack of wrecked German vehicles which the French destroyed. All of the CCKW 532 trucks have the unit markings of the 82nd Airborne. This division was no longer even in France anymore, having gone back to England in early July. The 8cm Granatwerfer unsurprisingly has unlimited shells. Nichols also operates it all by himself. These motors would need a crew of 2, one to load and the other to dial in the tube. In addition, the engagement range we're shooting at is well below the 400 meter minimum distance. The motors being used way too close to their targets is something we often see the Germans doing throughout this game too. We are brought back to our Canadians at the Laizon River, which the game misspells with an S instead of a Z. Laizon was misspelled this way in many documents and maps of the region at this time, thus likely leading to the misspelling in game. The mission takes place on August 14th at 6 PM. By this time, the majority of the Canadian forces had already crossed the Laizon. The last remnants of the tanks had crossed by 3:30 PM. Our private begins armed with a Sten SMG. Only the corporal of a section would be allocated a Sten. We also carry a scoped Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark 1T. We again should not have 2 such guns. We were also shown to be our section's Bren gunner in the first Canadian level, so why are we suddenly a sharpshooter now? The No. 32 telescopic sight has the same incorrect reticle as the rest of the game's scopes. It should look like this instead. Reloading sees us insert invisible bullets into the Lee Enfield. The weather is very cloudy and overcast, which is completely wrong. There are many recollections from the tank and half-track drivers about the bright sun and thick dust making it incredibly difficult to see, to the point that many vehicles were ambushed. The mission depicts our soldiers and armour moving south downriver. However, in reality, the rest of the division continued northeast instead, so as not to become congested with the other vehicles from the other regiments. Also, the Laizon River doesn't even go south, it goes east to west. The Laizon was quite a shallow river. The only obstacle was the steep banks which acted as a rudimentary tank ditch. However, many tanks were able to cross the river with assistance from Churchill tanks carrying fascines from the 79th Armoured Division. The fascines carrying large bundles of wood would bridge the gap. This fails to feature in game. We encounter just SS forces in this level. There were a few battalions of soldiers from the 12th SS Panzer Division here. However, the majority of troops in the region were of the Wehrmacht 85th Infantry Division.
When half the squad advances on it, the rest would flank left.
This confirms that our squad or section consists of just 6 soldiers, when there should be 10 in reality. The only reported Tiger tank was not in this sector of the Laizon, but further west, which disrupted the crossings of the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division, not the 4th Armoured that we're a part of. We briefly see our Polish tankers near Trun, but once again the times and dates are off, as Trun was already liberated by the morning of August 18th. The Polish and Canadians were already past the town by this time. It would make sense if this took place on August 16th before the assault towards Trun had begun.
We have new orders. We are taking Mount Ormel next.
We? So just us?
The Canadians are right behind.
So just us.
Ol1 is actually right. The Canadians are not just behind the Polish. The divisional commander, Stanisław Wafik, ordered the Polish to split into 3 groups, splitting towards Chambois, Mount Ormel and Chapeau-Sausat. The Canadians would remain behind at St. Lambert-sur-Dives. We are brought back to our Americans in Le Bourg and Leonard on August 18th. The attack here took place on the 16th and 17th of August. Once again, to keep in line with the Polish cutscene, it would make sense if this took place on August 16th, especially as the town was secured by 6 PM on August 17th, 1944.
Never figured I'd buy it from our own bombs.
Yeah, they don't call it friendly fire for nothing.
There is no evidence of any artillery friendly fire instances like this occurring during the battle. This level sees us face mostly SS soldiers with some Fallschirmjäger at the end. This village was being attacked by both the 2nd SS Panzer Division and Heer forces of the 116th Panzer Division. No Fallschirmjäger were present. The Hitler Youth knife that this SS soldier is wielding has its inscription upside down. This soldier also carries a Model 39 Einhandgranate. It is nice to see a game finally include this grenade, though we only see a single example of it here solely in this one QuickTime event, with all the other enemy grenades being the Stielhandgranate. This is in contrast to the fact that the M39 Einhandgranate was actually the most produced German grenade of World War II. We pushed south into the village. However, the only areas the Germans had control over were in the north side of the village. Did the Germans somehow get behind us?
Man down! We need a medic in our position ASAP! Over! Can you get him to our position? Over!
Once again, Guzzo, amazing work with your radio callouts. How on earth did you get this assignment? Just like on the island mission, Guzzo's radio callouts lack specifics. The operator on the other side does not know your position. Despite Guzzo's extremely vague callouts, a medic does hastily arrive, but it is again just a regular infantryman, instead of the medic model that we saw in the previous forest level. To no one's surprise really, the layout of La Bouche de Leonard is fictionalized and not matching with the real village.
Friggin' Krauts have our guns!
Guns in this context usually refers to artillery, but the German counterattack did not reach the divisional artillery in reality. In Treyarch's attempt to make the battle look cooler, they put a bunch of dogfighting aircraft in the skies. At one stage, a German Ju-87 Stuka crashes on our position. There is no evidence to support this occurring during the real battle, not to mention that German doctrine in 1944 called for Stukas to be exclusively used for night attacks. The game's obsession with putting swastikas everywhere suddenly stops in this level for some reason, with all of the German banners instead being the censored Iron Cross version. If they wanted to censor the flags, then they should have at least been consistent about it. Another counterattack. We've reached pure fanatical at this point. In reality, the German attack fizzled out once the 359th Regiment took the village. The 2nd SS Panzer Division was ordered to fall back and retreat through the Falaise Gap, leaving a mere 80 men from the reconnaissance battalion of the 116th Panzer Division to defend the area.
I got some good news and bad news for you boys. The Canadians have taken the Laizon River. The Poles have moved into Vimoutier to the north. Bottom line, Jerry's boxed in pretty good. We got him falling back towards Chambois.
This interaction between Dixon and the squad makes it seem that the Allies are unaware of the Falaise Gap and the potential trapping of numerous German divisions. But Allied commanders were already aware of the gap since August 8, and every battle since then was contributing to the engulfment of von Kluge's Army Group B. Also, the news of the Canadians and Poles taking their respective locations further adds to the point that this mission should have taken place a few days earlier. By the afternoon of August 18th, the Polish were already assaulting the outskirts of Chambois, and the Canadians were poised to take St. Lambert-sur-Dives.
So what's the bad news?
Chambois is where we're going next.
The 90th Division were already aware that they were to take Chambois. That's why we're pushing through La Bouche St. Leonard. We are brought back to the British point of view to conduct an attack on Les Ormes. This village was attacked by SAS troops of Operation Kipling, and the real events differ and were actually more crazy than what the game depicts. The first thing that is off is the date, as the actual battle for Les Ormes occurred on August 23rd, not August 20th.
In all likelihood, your Major Ingram is dead.
Forget likelihood. If there's a snowball's chance in hell he's alive, I'm getting him out.
There isn't, and you'll be killed too.
Not just me, Frenchie. Doyle's coming with me. Let's go, Doyle. We're doing this even if we have to do it alone.
What caused the SAS to attack this village was not to free the fictional character of Major Ingram. In reality, it was Lieutenant Richardson and Captain Harris that discovered the situation at Les Ormes, while en route to the Maquis base at Arras-Million. Contrary to how we start this mission, the two saw smoke billowing from the village, and a woman on a bicycle would stop them and ask for assistance. None of this we see in game. The two jeeps that attacked Les Ormes were operated by SAS troops only, not any French resistance. We seem to be assuming the role of Captain Harris during this mission, as just like in reality, we drive into the square and shoot up the Germans and set vehicles on fire. However, Harris had reported 22 Maquis fighters ready to be executed, but here we only see 3. As to be expected, Les Ormes in-game looks different from its real-life version and lacks many of its landmarks. We are by default armed with both a Lee Enfield and trench gun. Where did our stand from the other British levels go? Why are we again carrying two primary weapons? And why is one of them an American shotgun? The enemies we encounter in this mission are more of the Feldgendarmerie. However, it was Waffen SS forces that were reported to be in this village. We encounter a couple of German officers in this level, but they are wearing just regular private uniforms with a visor cap and do not have any officer insignia. From here it seems the historicalness has run out, as in reality the Germans fled the village following the raid, as they thought the two jeeps were a part of a recon detachment for a larger force. There was no house-to-house clearing to free Ingram and Maquis like we do in game. C-47s can be seen flying over us in the square. While this would make sense, it does not match up that they are flying from east to west, as the drop zone was around the town of Ussel to the east. The German counterattack with the SD KFZ 222 never occurred here. We are brought back to our Canadians on the afternoon of August 20th. The main assault on St. Lambert-sur-Dives occurred on the morning of August 19th, conducted by Shermans from the South Alberta Regiment and the 10th Brigade. The Canadians took and held their sectors all day and all night, while the Germans continued to push them out. The game seems to be portraying a non-existent second wave going to relieve the other units inside the town on the 20th.
Word from command. The Poles have taken Hill 262, but they lost the radio operator.
We got bigger problems than that, Private.
This adds to them, sir. Command wants us to send a radio operator to help the Poles.
Well, then get going!
Why would the Canadians be the ones to pass on a radio and an operator to the Polish who are over 5 kilometers away and through enemy lines? Did the Poles only have one radio between them? They would have more inside their Shermans, not to mention the language barrier that the radio man would face.
One of our tank crew has gone missing. We're going off on a rescue op.
The rescuing of a tank crew being our mission is very likely based on the rescue mission conducted by Company Sergeant Major George Mitchell of B Company from the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, who, along with Corporal J.R. Holmes, rescued a Sherman tank crew after being ambushed by a German tank. However, the mission goes beyond this by later saying that the tank crew would be taken captive, which never happened in reality.
Is this all of you who made it?
Jerry took prisoners. They're being held in a tavern up away.
Our attack is accompanied by American CCKW trucks that even still have the USA markings on them. The Canadian military pattern truck would be a better replacement. We enter the village by crossing over the Div River from the southeast. This is where the Germans advanced from in reality, not the Canadians. The layout of St. Lambert-sur-Dives is represented incorrectly. It is too small and landmarks such as the church are missing. We are by default armed with both a Lee Enfield and Bren. Again, why do we keep changing guns from the previous Canadian levels? And good luck trying to single-handedly run and gun through a battle with both a rifle and a machine gun like this. Tiger tanks were reported in this area, however these were not reported until 10 PM as a final push out of the Falaise Gap. By this point the King Tiger tanks of the 503rd Heavy Tank Battalion were all but destroyed, with the remaining 2 King Tigers escaping the pocket earlier in the week. We only encounter Waffen SS in this level, even though there were also Heer forces of the 2nd Panzer Division and 353rd Infantry Division, as well as paratroopers of the 2nd Fossenjäger Division in this battle. We begin to see the SCG-44 among the Germans, but it has a similar problem to the earlier Gewehr 43, being that they completely replace all of the already too common MP40s, making the SCG's appearance far too numerous. We for some reason cock the SCG's charging handle twice upon changing mags, which would be entirely unnecessary. When reloading, we fail to press the mag release button. Both the spent and new mags inserted do not have any ammo in them. And when we melee, we see that the right side of the SCG-44's receiver is mirrored, lacking the ejection port and signature dust cover. The overall emptiness of allies in the village insinuates that the Canadians pulled out of this area of St. Lambert-sur-Dives. However, as previously mentioned, the Canadians took and held what ground they had. As the day progressed, German forces managed to bypass the Canadian holdouts in this village. So where are these Canadian holdouts? When we meet up with one of the Canadian tankers, we see that he is just wearing an infantry uniform instead of any tanker gear.
Sir!
What is it?
Well, we got what we came for, sir. The tank crew, I mean, and I was
Spit
wondering...
it out, Private! I'm on the clock
I
here.
was wondering why we aren't bugging out here, sir.
Because we are taking this town, is
I
why.
didn't... I thought we don't have the manpower, sir.
Give those tankers guns and we do!
What do you mean you're taking this town, Ruby Shoe? The town was already taken on the night of August 19th to the 20th. The Canadians at this stage spent the next few days defending it against fanatical attacks.
Look, the Polish are stranded up on Mount Ormel trying to hold onto that hill with both hands. They'll need reinforcements that'll have to move through this town to get there.
No, Ruby Shoe, the reinforcements won't drive through St. Lambert-sur-Dives. The town is perpendicular to Mount Ormel. Reinforcements would have come north at Montigny.
Looks like they converted the basement to ammo storage. There's enough explosives down here to take them out permanently.
Good idea. Set a charge on these barrels.
This is not an ammo storage. It is just a bunch of fuel barrels that the Germans for some reason stored in this random house basement. Why would they do this? These would be very heavy and hard to move up and down stairs. If this is an attempt to hide them from aircraft, then keeping them above ground with a camo netting would suffice. Our characters then plant explosives on them. But what exactly is the plan to escape? There are a lot of explosives in the next room, and the only barrier between us and the explosion is a brick wall. We would be red mist splattered along the wall after this explosion, but because logic is not a thing for most games, we somehow survive it afterwards. We are brought back to our Polish forces who are defending Mount Ormel or Hill 262 on August 20th. The game seems to be depicting the attack on Hill 262 that was conducted on this morning by elements of the 2nd and 9th SS Panzer Divisions. This assault did not engage the Poles until 9 AM, 4 hours after the 5 AM time in the title card. This German attack on the morning of August 20th came from the north and northeast, whereas this level sees the enemies chaotically coming at us from all directions. This area did experience cloudy weather on August 20th, but there is no evidence to suggest that such heavy rain and thunder was present. We begin this mission armed with both a Bren and Lee Enfield, which we carry on us even as we get in and out of our Sherman Firefly. The Polish tankers would not be given such arms due to the small interiors of their tanks. They would have lighter guns like Webley revolvers and Sten SMGs. Once again, the landscape is off. Despite starting this mission facing south, we cannot see the rest of the mace. As the slope of the hill descends, we should see the ridge's southern peak in the distance. There is also a strong lack of hedgerows. There was a manor house being used as an infirmary, but it looked different and was not located at the top of Mount Ormel. The ranks of some of the Poles are way too high to just be leading individual sections and tank crews in the front lines. Major Jakowicz, for example, would be in command of an entire company. The infantry soldiers of the Polish 1st Armoured Division in this level have very strangely coloured battle dress uniforms. They are in a green colour that look more like the Canadian ones rather than the brown British ones that the Poles wore in reality. They share most of the inaccuracies as the Canadian uniforms, including not having any rank insignia, wearing a mad amount of Webley revolver pouches, and missing a number of standard gear items. The Mark II Brodies they wear have M1 chin straps instead of the correct elastic one-piece chin strap. Same goes for the Mark II Paratrooper helmet they've repurposed as a tanker helmet. Our Polish character is by default armed both with American Mark II and AN M8HC smoke grenades. We even find Mark IIs among the Polish defences in German crates for some reason. They should be the aforementioned British alternatives. The Poles are found using American M1919A6s. British Vickers MGs will be a better replacement. The M1919A6 has no ammo feeding into it, yet still somehow fires.
Take the sniper rifle!
They are scoped FG42 automatic rifles. This gun's appearance here does not even make much sense as we only face SS forces in this level, whereas the FG42 was made for and used by the Fossenjäger. When we are spotting for our artillery, we use binoculars to magically spawn red flares over the targets. Also, the illustration used for our artillery guns are German Flak 88s instead of any appropriate allied gun. We come across German MG34s that the Polish apparently captured and set up as part of their defences. The MG34 only appears in this level for some reason, despite it being a very common German MG, especially among less well-equipped troops like the rear guard units we encountered in the British levels. The MG34's vented heat shield texture appears on the bipod for some reason. This is not how it should be reloaded. Using the Gertrommel 34 belt drum mag in reality requires the top cover to be opened and the belt in the drum to be positioned correctly. It seems that the developers instead thought that this was an actual drum magazine rather than just a container for a belt. The Gertrammel 34 holds a total of 50 rounds, but it somehow holds 75 rounds in game. There is always ammo seen in the belt drum even when we empty the weapon. The bonus materials incorrectly refers to the MG34 as a light machine gun, when it is actually a general purpose machine gun. On the hill there are piles of American M1 helmets lying around alongside stacks of British Lee Enfields. This makes no sense as Commonwealth forces didn't use the M1 during the war. We also find CCWK trucks. The Polish did use some of these, but they would have their own insignia on them and not the USA ones. The Canadians did not arrive at Hill 262 until around midday on the following day of August 21st. The compass shows the Canadians coming from the east, however the Canadians came from the west in reality. We are brought back to our Americans to defend Chambois. The American 90th Division were at Chambois, but only a very small portion at the east and southwest sectors outside of the village. The defense inside Chambois was done by units from the Polish 1st Armoured Division.
From Major Holden.
There was no such Major Holden in the 90th Infantry Division. Major Leonard Dull was the commanding officer in the field and helped coordinate the defense around Chambois. The presented time of 1 PM is once again wrong. After the Polish had taken the village, the German counterattack did not occur until the evening of August 20th. The layout of Chambois is of course wrong. Many landmarks are absent, such as the village's iconic castle and the Div River crossing that should be to the south. The attack on Chambois was conducted by air forces of the 116th Panzer Division, in addition to various other elements of the 5th and 7th Armies. Yet in game, we only face SS forces.
Where the hell is Huxley with that bazooka?
Huxley's role in our squad is all over the place. He started carrying an SMG in St. Lo, then he got a trench gun. He was a demolition expert and insinuated to be our squad's engineer in Mayenne, but in this mission he now uses a bazooka. The bazooka would be allocated a crew of 2, consisting of the operator and loader. They are only shown to be single-handedly used in game though. Guzzo back at it again with the terrible radio communication. Later we have to cover him as he throws flares, which would not be seen by aircraft in broad daylight, but they are anyway in game because of course.
They're gonna kill us! Our own bombs! Guy's got a point! This happens again, I'm done calling in air support! Stay cool, alright?
Friendly fire did occur during World War II, especially with bombing raids, but none were reported during the battle for Chambois or previously with La Bouche-Saint-Leonard. Actual friendly fire incidences like the ones with the Polish near Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil were not shown, but ones that were not reported are? What is going on here, Treyarch?
That's Baker Company! They need reinforcements on the other side of town! You heard the man! Double time it! Great!
Baker Company was in 1st Battalion, and 1st Battalion were positioned southwest of Chambois across the Dives River. Numerous SD KFZ-222s are seen engaging us. This version of armoured car was not all that common, with around 1,000 of them made in total. They had stopped being produced in late 1943 and were used in reconnaissance roles, not direct infantry attacks like this. Our character somehow single-handedly uses a Pak-43, despite needing a crew of at least 3 to properly operate. We do not even load it in game, it just reloads for us and fires endlessly. We are able to use the anachronistic M9A1 bazooka in this level, but just like the Panzerschreck, it should not function, as the reload sees us just shoving in the rocket without attaching the wire from the box near the rear to prime the rocket. The M9A1 sight has an incorrect reticle that does not match with its actual viewfinder one. Our characters are then seen receiving replacements 2 days later at an Allied depot in Chambois. The 90th Division forces were pulled off the line 2 days after the gap closed, but this occurred in Argenton, over 5 kilometers away from Chambois. Guzzo's jump from private first class to sergeant is very unlikely. I am starting to see why McCullen hated him so much. He has a record of reported insubordinance and attitude issues, not to mention his terrible radio communication. He likely would just get corporal from his battlefield promotion during the Battle of Chambois. Guzzo has apparently stolen the 29th Division helmet that Dixon took from McCullen, who originally wore it even after his squad joined the 90th. If the game was trying to show the characters' care for their fallen comrades through items like this, then there were other more realistic ways to do so. We see 90th Infantry Division forces in Paris, which we can tell by their patches. The 90th were never sent here however. They were held back until August 26 when they were sent to Fontainebleau, which is a few miles south of Paris. None of the French tricolour flags hung on the Arc de Triomphe were as badly worn and damaged as this one. A fun fact about the flag placed here by the Parisian firefighters in the resistance upon the liberation of the city on August 25th is that a mad lad of an American soldier did the ultimate devious lick by stealing it and bringing it back to the States. He did not return it to Paris until 2008 when he was an aging veteran. And so we are left with a total of over 390 historical inaccuracies. Massive thanks to the channel patrons and members for their support. Big appreciation to the critical work of our other researchers Davidson, GI Combat, Michael Ackerman, K9, Carabini and Fariza. Remember to check out Hone via the links below for the best PC optimization. For more inaccuracies, click on this video covering the original Call of Duty, or this one on its expansion pack United Offensive. Well done and thank you for making it through this 100-minute feature film length of a video. This has been the Frosty One, out.